Good afternoon. Good afternoon to all participants. Welcome to the Southern African Real Estate Society webinar, which is sponsored by Gyro Group. And today we have about 100 registered participants. I suppose people would trickle in as we carry on. My name is Kola Akinsomi, and I'm the moderator for today. I'm the Vice President of the African Real Estate Society. Just to give an overview of the African Real Estate Society for those that don't know, African Real Estate Society was created in '97. It's a non-profit organization which is run by 100% volunteers. The African Real Estate Society is under the umbrella of the International Real Estate Society, and some of our sister societies are the American, Asian, and European, and Latin American. So we're happy to have one of the panelists who is from the American Real Estate Society here with us today, Kenneth, Soyeh. For any membership opportunities in AfRES, please contact me at kola.akinsomi@gmail.com. So just to introduce our panelists today, our panelists include Kenneth Soyeh. He's the assistant professor at Charleston College in the United States. I don't know, Kenneth, if you just want to raise your hand so that people can, yes, Kenneth, yes. And we have Gavin Olivier, who is the managing executive of Wits Digital Campus. Samuel Azasu, who is the associate professor at the University of Witwatersrand, and we have Francois Viruly, who is the associate professor at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. So a bit of house rules. There isn't a chat functionality today, but what we'll do after the seminar is if you have some question that you'd like to ask, we'll pass the mic over to you, and then you can ask the questions to specific panelists, or you can just ask a generic question. The reason why we've decided to create this webinar today, which is remote online education, how to adapt in a fast changing world, is obviously because of the COVID-19. And what we've seen is that universities are now starting to demand of their staff to start to teach online because the issue of face-to-face is no longer is not an option any longer. So it's happened that academics have now had to switch online, and we've now come into uncharted territory. Some of us are teaching online for the very first time. And so that is what our panelists would be discussing today. They'll be trying to unpack mystery behind online. They'll try to demystify the online education. And with that, what I would do now is to pass it on to the panelists. What I would do now is each panelist would actually give us about a 5 minutes or 4 to 5 minutes experiential sort of experience on online education. So if I'll start with Kenneth first, and then I would move on to Gavin, then Sam, and then finally Francois, before we go into the possible question. Kenneth, over to you.
All right, thank you, Kola, and hello to everyone. As Kola said, my name is Ken. I'm from Ghana, but I'm just based here in the US. In terms of online teaching, I've taught online different levels. I've taught at a graduate level as well as an undergraduate level. And my feeling about online teaching is that it can be an effective way to deliver course content and obviously achieve learning objectives, but it needs a lot of planning at hand. Now, because teaching online takes a lot of time, as many of you might know, you gotta maybe record lectures sometimes and organize them properly so that students can follow. And you have to also design assessments that students can actually participate and make the course moving effectively. And I think going forward, we all have, as instructors and professors, have to figure out a way to do it effectively so that students can actually benefit.
Okay. Thank you, Kenneth. Gavin, you want to come in, please? Oh, sorry.
Thank you for unmuting me. Good afternoon, Kola. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I think in preparing for the webinar, I was looking and in true fashion, did a little bit of research, and online education is not new. It's been around for years, in fact. And it was interesting to see as far back as 1922 that online education was used to deliver lectures at Penn State University and so forth via radio and the like. So things have been around for many time. In terms of using technology, and I think the challenge that we're having now with what this pandemic has brought upon us is speed and scale. And suddenly we've been expected to convert at a rate that we never anticipated, and at a scale that we're not used to. And so that is bringing about both challenges to us as online educators and providers of online learning, and the need for rapid adaptation and adoption of online learning, which is where the biggest challenges lie for us. So looking forward to exploring that with yourselves and the panel today as we go through this. So enjoying the journey. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Gavin. Sam?
Hello, everybody. Well, look, I came back from sabbatical in September last year. And while on sabbatical, I had students to supervise and I was assigned new students. Now, I have tried to maintain contact with these students during the sabbatical and, with different results. And now, what is happening now, as Gavin pointed out, is an entirely different ballgame in terms of the speed with which we have to do it and the scale. It is a little unprecedented in that respect. And the first thing I want to point out is that a lot of what we're currently doing, or what we currently see happening in the universities, is trying to deliver face-to-face content using technology. It is an entirely different ballgame, planning and teaching online. And so what we see here is a mad dash to make up for lost time and to prevent the academic year from breaking down. And what you're basically seeing is a mix of both. But I think as the discussion goes on, we'll be able to unpack what serves as interim stopgap measures and what authentic online education should look like. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Right. Excellent. Thank you, Sam. Francois?
Hi everyone. Good to be here, and thank you for the initiative. I think the point has already been made that online learning has been with us. But I think, as Sam already indicated, online learning needs big capital, it needs a commitment, and that is one thing many of us are not having at the moment. In other words, I prefer to call what we have now not online learning, but emergency remote teaching. This is an emergency remote. So, and I think that's quite important that when we have people on our courses, that we make that very clear. And yes, we are somewhere in between face-to-face and online. The other thing which I hope we will discuss, and that is many of us who may not have liked online learning are being pushed into the technologies, whether you like it or not. So you of course have individuals who said, no, that's not my thing, I'm not doing online. Well, many of us don't have that choice at the moment. And then maybe a few things that we may want to discuss. First of all is access. And the point I make is, if you're going to go online, you better be sure that your students are online. Otherwise, it's a bit like teaching and closing the door of the lecture room. Saying some of you are outside the door and some of you are inside the room. We're going to make sure that we do our very best to ensure that everyone is still with us. Now, and later maybe we can talk about it. There are surveys that we are getting that we could be losing about 30% of our students. So I think that especially across our continent, we have to be very cognitive of access to technology, the technological divide that exists in our societies, the costs for students. And then I think I'm just going to leave it on the following, that we have to be careful with online, that online education is not run by the techies and by tech firms, and that still the educator remains at the center of it all. Otherwise, I think we run the risk that the educator starts playing a second role in all of this. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Francois. Okay, so I'll just, unfortunately, one of our panelists is unable to join us. So Sean Godoy is stepping in. And Sean, can you please share some experiences that you have from online teaching?
Sure. Thank you, Kola, and hello to the other panelists and to everybody listening and watching. It's good to be here. I'm just as a quick background, I'm an independent property consultant, and I'm involved with running 2 property-related online short courses with Get Smarter and UCT. So similar platform to Wits Digital Campus. So that's obviously a fully online method of delivering these courses. And that's on sort of, I guess, one end of the spectrum that we're looking at in terms of teaching remotely. And as Francois has mentioned, I think this is more of an emergency remote teaching to ensure that obviously students and on their degree courses can continue to learn and submit assignments, etc. But we just need to be realistic, I think, of what's achievable in the short time frame. And obviously, a fully online platform is probably not going to be available to most institutions and most lecturers in terms of the time, the resources. So obviously, my experience has been fully online. But this is, I guess, the trick here is to get a good mix of methods and types of media, etc., that work for the students and for the lecturers involved, and obviously don't put additional sort of stress and time pressure on lecturers and the other admin staff involved.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Sean. And so basically, what we're going to do now is there'll be a series of questions that I'll be asking the panelists, and I think for us, I think I just need to start from the very basic before we start moving on to pedagogy or outcomes and assessments and stuff like that. I think the first question that I want to ask, and I want Sam to respond to this, is what made you nervous in the transition to online? Because obviously you've have so many, I don't know, over 20 years of experience teaching face-to-face. I'm not sure if you've done anything online before, and what made you nervous, and what have you done to sort of calm those nerves, or obviously preparations and stuff in this particular month which you had to transition?
Yeah, sorry. Full disclosure, I did interact briefly with Digital Campus about 3 years ago when they introduced the idea of perhaps putting some of our courses online. So I volunteered as a guinea pig. On a normal day, one of the big challenges we face on the continent is training employable graduates. And so, as you would know, Kola, one of the things we've tried to do at Wits is to try to ensure we're integrating employable skills, job-related skills, personal, interpersonal, and professional skills into our courses. So for me, the transition to online raised the question, how do we preserve skill integration when you no longer have the students in front of you, dividing them into groups, getting them to collaborate in real time? how do you transition skill integration into an online environment? That for me was the big unknown going into this. And also the second big unknown was how similar or how different will online teaching be compared to what I do in the classroom? And luckily, when you work with a company like Digital Campus, one of the things they will do is that they will assign you an education developer. So you're not just writing content. An education developer will help you sketch almost like a roadmap of what you're going to teach, right down to video scripts before you actually start putting the material together. So two big points of huge uncertainty and nervousness was, how do we preserve skill integration? And second, what differences and similarities will exist between classroom teaching and online teaching?
All right. Thanks, Sam. Kenneth, can you please comment in terms of when you are transitioning from face-to-face to online, what are the things that made you nervous? And maybe you can give us tips on actually preparing for that transition itself.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Now, the one thing that made me nervous was basically assessment. How will I be able to assess my students without them maybe copying things from other sources that I usually have control over when I give them the exam in a classroom setting? Now, in terms of how they will be able to assess the material, that is kind of a different ball game for me, because being in the US, almost everyone has access to internet. Maybe the speed might vary, but everyone has access to internet. So I didn't really think about whether the students will be able to assess my material. My main concern was assessment, basically to ensure the integrity of my assessment. Now, to overcome that, what I've done is that most of my questions, when I put them there on a platform, I use the school's platform, I make sure that I randomize my questions so that each student will get a different set of questions, so that they might not be able to rely on a friend to get those answers, because they are different questions, although they might have, maybe I teach mostly quantitative courses like real estate, finance, investment, and all that is quantitative in nature. So I can change the numbers for different students, okay? So when you pull, you have a different set of numbers from your friend. Now, in terms of some other things, I make sure that I also have what we call turn it in, so that when I give an assignment and students turn in the assignment, it checks for plagiarism. Mm-hmm. So that when you take your friend's work and submit, I'm able to detect that it's being taken or is being checked to make sure that it's your actual work. Okay. So those were the things that I had fears over, but I think I've been able to, in a way, control that to some extent.
Yeah, thanks, Kenneth. I think you introduced, something, very critical, or quite significant. Specifically, you talked about assessment, and then so you talked about, the students as well. The issue of plagiarism comes into play as well, because if you're actually giving students the exact same assignment, it seems that perhaps maybe online as well, there's a higher ability for them to just copy and paste. But I think as you introduced, there are softwares there like Turnitin that we can actually run it through, and also reduce that sort of the possibility of that. Francois, can I just bring you in?
Sure. Yeah. I suppose it's the same question you'd like me to respond to. I think there are a few things that made me nervous. First of all, education is not just about content. There's a lot more to education than the 5-minute clips and sending documents. It's the graduateness of our students. It's what sort of graduates we are looking for. And what made me very nervous is that my lectures are not just about, it's also about the novel I happen to be reading this weekend. It's also what I heard on TV last night. Now, and this online education can become very clinical. It can become a clip that was put together 2 years ago, which one keeps on using and nothing changes. And I think one has to be, so what I'm saying, it's the level of engagement. Now, the second thing that made me nervous is that many people think that online education is about the platform. That's the easy bit. I mean, Sean, you can talk to that, but when you go online, you have a level of communication through chat rooms, emails, which can completely overwhelm you. And I think that getting protocols around discussions become so I suppose what I'm saying is one has to maintain the warmth of the education process and not lose that into something that looks very efficient, where yes, the content has come across, the quizzes have been done, but the educator hasn't really come across. And we all have, I mean, I'm a Keynesian economics. I have my view on economics, and I will portray those in the class. Will I do it as the way that I would do it on a face? So I think I take the view on assessment. That made me nervous. And people do argue, maybe with Zoom, we should be looking at orals that we can record, where after an assignment, you have a 2-minute discussion with a student. Mm-hmm. It's time consuming. I mean, try getting through 60 students on that basis. There are always Proctor and others, but those are all difficult to run as. So I suppose if I come back, I think the efficiencies we can run, I think we can find our ways about it. Mm. But how do we maintain the educator, as I said earlier, central to this? Like I said, there's a good part of my lectures which have nothing to do with the subject whatsoever, but which you would hope broadens the minds of our students beyond the strict content that we're trying to put across.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Francois. And I think what I tried to latch on, some of the things that you said was based on, you talked a bit about assessments as well. And I think that we can now move on to how can we adopt an approach to assessments, and specifically online. And then I'd like to bring in Gavin here. Specifically, Gavin, what I would like you to address is, how do you assess students for courses with perhaps the mathematical content online? Specifically for real estate as well, there's some specific subjects in real estate are more investment-based, they're more numbers-based, they're more mathematically inclined. And so I would like you to sort of share with us, what are the best ways for assessing students in terms of mathematical content, and how can we make sure that the students perform these tasks within the time frame? Actually, that was raised by one of the participants here, Primrose. And Gavin, after Gavin, I would like Kenneth to come in as well, please.
Great, thanks, Kola. Yeah, so some of the, and certainly understand the anxiety that many have expressed around assessment. It certainly is something that we've felt as well. Francois mentioned virtual proctoring, which is one of the methods that we apply through again the technology that's there to be able to monitor and assess the levels of engagement within the assessment. Specifically to the question of mathematical assessment and so forth. Again, in one of the courses that we have exactly that on the finance course, where the assessments are a timed assessment. It starts at a particular time and it ends at a particular time. And come that time, that's it. You are pre-warned that the time is up, and if you finish the assignment, it submits you either have the option of submitting, or the system actually takes over and submits it. So there is no opportunity to extend the time allocation. So that often takes care of that. The other thing that I perhaps want to pick up on is one of the key things of going online with this, Francois mentioned it, is one, to make sure that your students are in the room, and to make sure that the right students in the room, which I can imagine is a massive anxiety for many folk to say, Gavin enrolled on the course. Did Gavin complete the learning is it Gavin that's actually logged in and assigned to write the examination. Now there's technologies out there that we can use facial recognition, and I mean we've all got our cameras on now, and there's means to do that, and those things are going to become commonplace as we progress down this online experience. And so, you know, in that way we are comfortable and convinced that the person who signed up for the examination is in fact the person writing it. But you know, we've got to rely on the technology that's in place and the levels of engagement with that technology. But you know, how we deal with the struggle of Francois in terms of keeping the lecturer engaged beyond just the delivery of the content is going to be a challenge, because you know there's a limited time availability to deliver these lectures, and we've got to be conscious of that.
All right. Thanks so much, Gavin. Excellent. And so what I hear from you is that there are technologies that are already in place, you know, that can use to facilitate the sort of the assessment specifically mathematically. Kenneth, can I just bring you in? Because I do, if I'm not mistaken, Kenneth, I know that your research, you do a lot of real estate finance and investments, and I would suppose that that's what you actually do when you teach as well. Can you share with us, you know, in terms of the online, in terms of assessments and using maths and mathematics online, how can we make sure that the students perform the task, you know, within the ideal time frame?
Right. So I usually encourage my students to use Excel because actually when you go out and you work in the real world, most of the things you do, you use financial calculator not very much. You rely more on Excel to do that. So using Excel is one of the ways I encourage my students to do. And if I was given an assessment, I wouldn't have a problem if they can submit their whatever is an exam or whatever using Excel. I wouldn't have that problem. Once it's their own work, they are not taking that from a friend and submitting. I don't have that issue. Now, I'll go back to Francois about losing the students in the online learning. The important thing for the instructor or the professor is that you have to stay engaged with those students. And in doing that, your Blackboard or whatever platform you are using, you can always use participation. You can create a way where you can discuss general topics. It doesn't have to necessarily be, just one particular topic. Your own opinions, you can put them there for students to also contribute to those opinions, okay? That way you keep on, you bring things outside the normal content so that students can also broaden their knowledge, okay? Now, if you're an online instructor and you just put things there and you leave, obviously the students are also going to move away. You're also going to lose them if you don't stay in touch constantly. Now, what I do is that given this COVID pandemic, what I did was to update my syllabus to give them some guidance, to tell them that I'll try to respond to emails, usually within 24 hours. So if you send me an email, I'll try to respond within 24 hours. So students have an expectation as to when they'll get a response from me. Now, obviously the weekends, I tell them that the weekends my response will be slower because obviously on the weekends I might not be able to respond. But during the course time, if you have any questions about the course or anything related to your learning, feel free to email me. That way students know that you are engaged, okay? And so that's the approach I try to use, given the circumstances.
All right, Kenneth, thanks, excellent. I think we're able to get that. There is a possibility to teach online and also mathematically, even using sort of real estate finance and investments is definitely possible. And what Gavin has alluded to is that we need to introduce more. We need to introduce more technology in the classroom. Kenneth also made mention of Excel as well. Excel can be used as an online to facilitate the learning as well mathematically. So thank you for that, Kenneth. I would like to, because, okay, I'll also bring in Sam. Sam, I'll come to you in a minute. So just I'll come back to you. But Kenneth, what I wanted to come back to was you made mention that you made mention of Blackboard. There's actually one of our participants as well that wanted to find out what are the online assessments that is preferable, and that's from Diane, and also do universities use their own platforms? So when you introduce Blackboard as well, perhaps maybe you can share with us what the Blackboard is, and then I would like Sean as well to come in as well after Kenneth as well to talk about sort of platforms. I think the lady was Diane was alluding to that, and then Samuel, I'll bring you in afterwards. Okay, Ken.
Yes. So the Blackboard is just a place for you to put material for your students so that your students can go to one place to take that material, right? There are various platforms. Blackboard is one of them. Others have Desire to Learn, others have other things, okay? And so there, the material is there for the students. Anytime they go there, they can access that material. And you can actually monitor whether students actually go to that platform or not, because you see when they log in and when they log out, okay? So you can actually get that information. Now, within that Blackboard, you can always send an email and it goes to every student, okay? You can post news about the course and it will go to every student, okay? So that way, the students come to the same place to get materials, to take lecture slides or whatever you put there. And if you create an assessment, it's there and you can time that assessment when you want it to start, when you want it to be over. And you can actually grade that assignment automatically. If it's multiple choice, okay? You can grade automatically for the students or grade automatically for you. Now, in terms of whether you want to use that to assess students, I think that would be the most ideal if it was from the university, because you have control than if we're using a second party or a third party platform. Because you have control, because you use your login details. And so we assume that no one can hack into your exam, right? So I'll encourage, if you have the school's Blackboard, to use that instead of using a third party. And there are third parties, and one of them, which is very popular, is what we call Akindi, where you can send materials or exam through them to your students. But then again, that you don't have control, so you don't know what is going to happen. But I'll rely on my school's platform to do that. If they had Blackboard or whatever platform they had that you use to deliver materials to do that, okay? Or maybe you can also use their email address to send them exams. It's better than using a third party, because that way, if it's the school's email address, I'm assuming that if each student has an email address attributable to the student, okay? Most schools have email addresses for the students, right? So yeah, that's another way.
Excellent. Kenneth, thank you so much. I think you've also brought in another discussion in terms of control as well. That's another aspect that we can go in. You talked about internally. Does the university have their own platforms, or are we using an external platform? And so let me just introduce Sean, just to give us some comments on that based on his experience, and then we'll move on to Sam. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Kola. Yeah, so in terms of the platform I use on the short courses I'm involved in, there are a variety of those available, which are basically set up where you can upload content and set up discussions, assessments, etc., such as Teachable, which is a subscription-based service, which a lot of them are. But that, like I say, is if you're going for a full online education experience and there's a cost involved. So in this instance, that might not be suitable for all parties. So obviously something like Blackboard might be part of what the university has in their resources, or some universities have their own online system that's been developed for them specifically. So those are things that people may use. And in terms of free resources that could be sort of tailored to a course that a lecturer is developing, we use, in terms of the work we do, a lot of us are remote on the course in terms of development and running it. So things like Google Docs is obviously very useful. Like Kenneth says, is obviously you can't control submissions, etc., and editing as much as you'd like, but obviously it can be useful. And then there's also things like Slack and Monday.com, which are basically project management tools. So there is some free functionality on these. Obviously, if you have a class of 80 students, I'm not too sure of like the maximum users on the free versions, but these could also be useful tools to set up a classroom environment, or at least discussions. and they're sort of assigning tasks, and there's probably some functionality to set up some sort of assessment, but it's obviously not aimed as an academic tool, more teamwork tool, but that could be useful in a classwork and classroom environment. So I think it's good to consider these other platforms that are out there. And then obviously the good old WhatsApp group. I think a lot of things run on WhatsApp groups. I know Sam and Francois, they have a lot of groups with their students, and I mean, that's quite interactive and can be quite useful. Again, it does have its obvious limitations, but I think in the situation we're dealing with here, there are a number of things that could sort of provide useful engagement with students that we shouldn't forget about.
Excellent. Sean, thank you so much. I think, whilst listening to you, what I could draw out is that, for example, in South Africa, South African universities, that they're well-resourced, especially from an African perspective. Each university has its own platform. For example, at Wits University, we have Sakai, and I'm sure at UCT as well, they do have something else. But what I particularly like that you brought out of your conversation is there are some free online resources out there. And it's specifically very important for our African universities, that, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Kenya, that the university might not be as resourced as Kent's University in the US or South African universities. And there are some resources out there that they can tap onto. So thank you so much, Sean, for alluding to that. Can I bring Sam? Sam, can I bring you in?
Okay, cool. Sorry. All right. Just to latch on to the previous discussions, having an internal learning management system like Sakai or Blackboard or Canvas, I noticed one of my Swedish colleagues is actually in the webinar, Peter. It's an advantage in the sense that you can use those platforms to run assessments, especially if your course, many of these courses now come with textbooks that have a question data bank that you can basically then pick from those questions if they're multiple choice and run it. So last week I was testing some of those tests, multiple choice questions for one of the courses. And that worked fairly well because by the time the test was over, it was automatically graded. I didn't have to deal with it. What requires work was when you ask the students to do a case analysis, and then they have to write long answers. Then that one, you have to go in there and read it. And for these ones, ongoing engagement, like Ken alluded to, is key. So to also add to what Sean was pointing out, if you have a normal PC with Microsoft Office, I think Microsoft Teams comes now with the package, if I'm not mistaken. And Microsoft Teams has an educational functionality that allows you to create courses, add your students, deposit materials, hold live lectures. The only problem with Microsoft Teams and many of these platforms is that my classes typically are 2.5 hours. Now, 2.5 hours of video lecturing chews data. And so I haven't used it for all the 3 courses I'm teaching. I use it for just one course. Another course, what I'm actually doing was that because Digital Campus and I had sketched out this course before we never really made it happen, I've basically taken those plans and written them out and put them up. So the videos I typically insert in those courses are 2-3 minutes long. And so minimum data usage, because one of the big discoveries in the last 4 weeks is not so much the platforms we can use. As a matter of fact, those are the easier ends of the discussion. Our students' infrastructure, our students' capacity to take on online content has proven to be the bigger challenge. Some of them didn't have laptops. Some of them didn't have neither laptops nor sophisticated enough phones or internet access. As a result, what I realized is that for what Francois is referring to to as emergency remote learning, we have to make sure that the approaches we take are extremely efficient in terms of data usage. So I've gone for writing out a lot of text with illustrations. Fortunately, I have a backlog of projects I've run, so I have a lot of examples I can embed. And then I do 2-3 minute videos using some of the free software that I found online. The only new thing is to try to make sure it's gloomy out there, what time of day the light is brightest for you to record your video, and how the video settings could be optimized. But one of the things we need to really bear in mind is the capacity and infrastructure on which our students sit with which to access our learning. I've gone for, okay, I'm not doing low tech, I'm not doing high tech, I'm trying to do for some like medium tech, which is make sure the thing is pedagogic, make sure it's well structured, minimum use of videos, maximum use of examples, embedding progress checks as they work through the material so that the students can self-monitor their progress. And so that's a bit about what I found to be like the kind of optimum solution going forward. And when time allows, I'll do it for all 3 courses. At the moment, I'm using that approach for only 1 course because it does consume a lot of time initially to put this together.
All right. Excellent. I think a bit, okay, right, excellent. Thanks, Sam. I think you've also, when I listened to you as well, there's some key takeaways that I could get out. And one of them that stuck one of them that resonated mostly was the data. Data access is a problem. I think we're going to spend a bit more time on that. I think that's another angle that we need to flesh out. But I'll bring Francois in now. Francois, I think you wanted to make a comment. I see your hand up.
Yeah, let me just also just add to some of the points that were made. I take Sam's view. I've also gone almost low tech. You know, he's sitting in medium, and yes, maybe it is medium with some of the videos, but really the thing is to position yourself very well in that respect. And yes, I'm also taking a view, a lot of writing, a lot of announcements, forums, chat rooms. The other thing is that if you do have a platform at a university, the students will know the platform. They will have used it to some degree, maybe not all the functions, but they will have used a lot of the functions in their face-to-face program. The other thing is by using your university platform, you'll get support. Be very careful because you could find yourself going into other where you will not get the same level necessarily of support. If anything goes wrong, if marks don't come through, I've had it with quizzes where things haven't, where they sorted it out for me and within a few hours it was done. My other observation, it really had to do with some of the discussion we've already had around assessment. Our systems, for example, allow us to create groups. So you can put students in groups and give them different assessments. Now it's time consuming and yes, but you could have 4 groups, each with a slightly different version that you could apply. But when it comes to the questions, I think there are opportunities to change the type of questions. I mean, I'm thinking, of course, you mustn't be in a lockdown, but in property, write about your neighborhood, developments in your neighborhood, using urban economic theory to explain it. Now, it's not going to be a lot of help to go and get your friends in that. So I think it's also, once we start looking at the questions that we pose, and of course that's not available everywhere if you have an Excel spreadsheet, that opportunity, but if you contextualize the question closer to, I'm not saying completely unique, but a bit of uniqueness in it, I think that can also play a role. my final observation is this, that whilst many of us are going on the online or emergency remote teaching at the moment, I think there's an opportunity here when we get back to normal, that we have an opportunity to flip the classroom. In other words, we start using, we've all been talking for years about flipping the classroom. Yeah, in short, everything that you do in the classroom goes home, and everything they used to do at home comes into the classroom. We're flipping it. And I think that with what we're creating here, the important thing, and I certainly don't see it as a once-off, and I think that's important, that you don't see that you're going to do this once and you'll never use this material again. You'll never create things that when we go back to face-to-face, we can maybe shift out of the classroom our traditional, listen to me, the sage on the stage approach, and that we do that. So I wouldn't argue. So what I'm saying is there's also an opportunity behind this.
Excellent. Thanks, Francois. And so I'll try to bring Gavin into this conversation, and we're having some interaction at the moment. And in this question as well, I'll have to be fair across board as well. So if any panelist wants to jump in as well, please feel free. So we have a question from Wanda. Wanda says that I've been doing some online courses via Coursera, but I did not find any real estate courses there. And is it possible for our panelists and their institutions to consider such platforms for online courses? Like I said, I'll give the floor to Gavin now. I know Francois will be itching to speak about that as well. But Gavin, if you'd like to go first.
As well. Would like me to start?
No, Gavin.
Yeah,
Gavin. Gavin first. All right.
Bit of space. Thanks. So I'm not going to pitch for the work to develop real estate courses, but clearly there's a demand out there, and I think it's perhaps to the point again of knowing your audience and knowing your students. So if there's a demand out there, if there's people out there that are asking for this, then as the universities, we need to be looking to ourselves to say, how are we responding to that? And to what extent are we leaning into giving the students a realistic solution that will enable them to continue their learning? I want to particularly pick up on Francois' point around flipping the classroom and going, once we revert to something resembling a new normality, what does that mean? And there's a lot of folk out there that are saying, as we progress into this online space, we have an opportunity to do it really, really well. Because if we don't, and if we mess it up and create a bad experience for people, the chances that we're going to be able to revert back when we go to normal and say, now we want to flip the classroom, we want to do more online, and we want to use technology more and more in the classroom, you're going to get a lot of resistance from students. So the opportunity to do it and do it well within the constraints of everything Samuel and Francois were mentioning, bandwidth and so forth, and engagement is crucial. But we can't afford to do a bad job of this, because if we do, people will exit, and you're gonna drag them kicking and screaming back into an online environment. So the importance of getting it right is critical, and probably adds a little bit more pressure to all of us engaged in the space. But the opportunity to turn the classroom on its head, exactly as Francois said, into the future is very exciting. And the world of tertiary education is, in case you didn't know, it has changed. It's not is changing, it has changed. And unless we adapt to it, we're going to be known as the also-rans, and somebody else is going to come do it on our behalf unless we do it for ourselves. So it's a critical opportunity that we have. How we adapt to it is up to us.
Yeah, excellent, Gavin. I think I do agree with you that there's a lot of opportunity there. At least every week I get emails specifically from Sub-Saharan Africa asking me for specific online real estate courses. And, well, I'm not trying to market my university, but I tend to then, because there are very good real estate online courses there, and we all know who offers it, right? And it's not within Africa. And there are a lot of universities in the US that have latched onto this executive courses very well. They do online programs and they facilitate it, you know, and so there's a lot of traction towards there. And I think, as you rightly said, Gavin, there is a massive opportunity here, and it's up to us how we make use of it. And Sam, let me just bring you in, and then I'll go on over to Francois.
So, I think Gavin made a very important point. When I started writing for an online audience, one of the first things I noticed is that, you see, in a normal classroom, you could be halfway through an explanation and a student raises their hand and say, I don't understand what you just said. And then you go back and rephrase what you're saying. Now, you don't have that luxury in an online environment. And as a result, one of the first differences I noticed between teaching live and teaching online is that the material has to be explicit in a way you wouldn't put it in a normal environment. So before you write the material, you have to sit down and really plan it out all the way to the end before you start writing it out. What it is doing to me as a teacher is that it is deepening my own understanding of courses I've taught for years, courses that I've taken for granted I understood. Writing for an online audience forces you to go into that material deeper than I expected to do. And there is a sense in which we might all come out better on as teachers simply because of the challenge this has introduced. For example, the book I use, first of all, the book is not published. It's just an unpublished manuscript that I had the privilege of getting from the widow of the author. But examples are based in and around LA because the lady lived in Southern California when it was written. We've been teaching this now for what, 6, 7 years, and run a number of projects. So now the opportunity it creates is that now I can embed examples from South Africa based on the projects we've run. So there is actually an opportunity to use this to become better teachers. But on the other hand, if we don't seize the opportunity and we screw it up, our reputations can actually take very severe damage. And so we really do need to approach this whole thing with a lot of caution.
All right, excellent. Francois?
Okay. Look, I think from what I've heard, I completely agree with what everybody is saying here, which doesn't happen that often. Not you people, but generally I enjoy disagreeing with people. But I think the important thing is, I think it comes back to a few things. First, online, you've got to maintain structure. You know, there's structure in the educational field. The other thing which we tend to forget is that there's a learning culture between students on campus. They know each other, they help each other, they sit in the library together, they have working buddies. And I think you've got to be very careful in the online world that doesn't get lost as well, that learning environment stays with us. The other observation that I have is that whilst you will find that students who may not necessarily put up their hand in the classroom will be part of the chat room. They're sort of WhatsApp, they're talking away. So whilst on the one hand, it works against you, it also opens up a bit the opportunity for some of the others. Although you can argue that, again, courses are not just about content. It's about character building, whatever you want to call it. It's to be able to express your view vocally. And we all know in a classroom when somebody says nothing at all, you say, hey, Tabo, why haven't you had a view on this? So to be able to push that out becomes... and then just one other opportunity that exists with online, and that is that you can open up the classroom to the world, in short. You can bring in specialists in the classroom. You can say to a retired property practitioner, would you mind coming in for 40 minutes? They wouldn't come to the university necessarily with a full PowerPoint presentation and everything else. So you can bring in specialists. I mean, we have a class coming up where I'm bringing 3 or 4 people in, trying to bring them physically in, especially in Cape Town when they're in Joburg and everything, would have been impossible. So I think it opens the classroom, which was a closed classroom of you and your student, now becomes an open classroom. And I think the opportunity, but also just to answer the question about courses, yes, I think many institutions have courses. The United States, of course, on top of that, but one has to remember that they also have the one advantage that, for example, property law across the United States, of course, every state is a bit different, but there's a commonality. The moment you go international with a course, you've got to be very careful that there's enough. For example, if we did a course with South African law, property law, how would others relate to outside of South Africa relate? So I think that you've got to be careful that it doesn't get too watered down. There are general principles and that you keep that local context going. And I think when we do things across the continent, we've got to be very mindful. But there are CPD courses. Sean can talk about his course. There are many other courses when we're not here to look at necessarily specific courses. And then on the master's program, there are opportunities. And I think that with the help of others, of people like Gavin and others, I think we can do a lot more going forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Francois. I think just to do a bit of recollection on what you've said was that I do know that, as you said, that the courses, we need to be careful that they are not localized. So it needs to be sort of broad and needs to appeal to a wide range of audience. And that's why we've seen that a lot of the short courses coming from the US, they tend to be more finance driven. They tend to be more investment driven, because obviously we know that finance and investment, the language, is not doesn't really deviate as much. So I do agree with you that we need to be very careful of the sort of the kind of courses that we're trying to sell. And so I would want to bring Sean and Kenneth in, but I want to change the discussion a little bit. And I want to talk more about project-based learning. And Sean, I want you to come in first, and then Kenneth, you'd come in afterwards. So specifically, I do know, again, I haven't done much of online, or I haven't done any online. I don't think I have done any. But with my face-to-face, what I tend to do in a commercial real estate investment courses or modules is that my students have a case study, right? And one of the case study is for them to do a feasibility report on an office property or a shopping mall, whatever the case may be. But again, there's a sort of, if we go online with projects, there's a sort of limitation. One limitation being that they're not able to go onto the site itself to do some site visits, and they're not able to interact with the property itself. So Sean, can you please sort of, just help assist us to understand how can we sort of those limitations, how we're able to work with those limitations, or to provide solutions for project-based learning online. And then Kenneth, I'll go to Kenneth after that.
Sure, thanks, Kola. Yeah, I think in terms of, a lot of areas and topics, sort of project-based learning can be useful, particularly in real estate, in terms of having a case study, which is usually a site or perhaps a precinct. And obviously there are challenges to online in terms of being able to visit the site, but having said that, you can still accomplish a lot. So in terms of the course, one of the courses I'm involved in, there's actually an ongoing project which carries through the 8 modules, where the students actually select their own site within a set of parameters that we provide. So it must be residential, a certain size, a certain value, because obviously you need to keep the sort of the scope and the scale in the sort of same range in terms of the assignments and also grading, etc. but that's quite useful because they can choose something that's relevant to them, and then they're going to go out and carry out a variety of research. A lot of it can be sort of desktop research, and we encourage the use of Google Maps, etc. Obviously, with property, a lot of people will say you need to walk the streets and understand the neighborhood, etc. So that's why we do encourage them to choose a site in a neighborhood that they're familiar with. So at least it's an area you know, perhaps you grew up there, you work there, etc. So then you do have that understanding. So in sort of without being able to visit the site, you still understand enough of the area, and you can carry out a significant amount of research online in terms of perhaps finding comparables, even if you use properties for sale, for valuation. Some planning information is available online. And in terms of a market analysis, you can also access a fair amount. The other option is challenge is access to data and information. Some services are paid. So we obviously try to structure things where they can use free resources as much as possible. The valuation sort of assessment is a good example, like I said, where we say they can use properties currently for sale, although ideally, in terms of the comparable method, you obviously want to use sold comparables, but you can use ones for sale and make certain assumptions. So there are ways to make it work, and we've seen that it has been successful. So I think if you set a case study that provides the right, you can actually provide information they need, and they can work with that. And the next step, like we said, where we've done, where they actually choose a site, they can choose something relevant to them. They will obviously encounter sort of a few hiccups here and there, but you can advise them to make assumptions as and when they need to. So that's our experience. And just sorry to comment on online real estate courses, just again from my experience, in terms of the students we've had on the course, have been fairly good numbers comparable to other domestic courses, and it is focused on South Africa, but we've had a number of students from across Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, East Africa, West Africa, which definitely indicates that demand. So just to add to that comment, I think there is room for institutions across the continent to look at offering these types of courses.
Right. Thanks, John. And I think, as I did mention to Francois earlier on, yes, there is the demand. I get emails regularly, so the demand is definitely there. And I've actually put some of them your way, so I know that the demand is there. And so, Kenneth, I would like to bring you in now. And can you please comment on follow-up comment on the project-based learning? Okay. And there's another specific question for you as well from the participants. Yes.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question, Kola. I will just add to what Sean said, which is the issue is that you can always get that information from just sitting behind your computer. You might not be able to see the property physically, but we can use Google Maps. And another way is to also communicate with either the property manager or the one directly, maybe leasing out the property or whatever, to get information. We collect primary data sometimes, right? And we don't have to physically go there. We can ask the person in charge about how they see the property. Maybe they might not give you all the information, but you can get some of the information. And we all know that some of the assignments we give, we usually ask students to make assumptions because it's just a way for them to learn, right? So if you, assuming you use Harvard case studies, sometimes it's just a property which is fictitious. It's not a physical property, and yet they are able to do that work. So if they are not physically being able to go to the property, they can still do the work by either collecting secondary data or primary data by interviewing the property managers or maybe the agent in charge of that property. So I think it can be done. Now, the other thing I want to also add is about the Coursera, why we don't have real estate courses from Africa. And I think, as most of you said, it's an opportunity for us as African scholars to design courses specifically for Africa. When I was an undergrad and I was learning valuation, we used to do valuation and we use tables from the UK. How can we be doing valuation in Ghana and be using valuation tables from the UK? And I was wondering what is the essence? Because the risks in the UK is different from the risks in Ghana. So how do we even do that? So as I've grown, I've always been thinking, what are the ways that we can bring those things into the African context without relying on other countries which have different fundamentals from ours, okay? So as scholars from Africa, that's what we have to begin to do and begin to maybe create courses specifically for Africa.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Ken. Thank you. And there is a specific question directed to you. So this is from Tubosun Oyedokun. I think he's from the University of, I believe, Glasgow in Scotland. He says to Kenneth, the implementation of online learning certainly requires intensive training. What can African universities learn from institutions in advanced countries in terms of training support they offer to academics?
Okay, that's a very excellent question. And even in advanced countries like here, not everyone teaches online. So online teaching is always new to a lot of people. Now, to be able to do that and help people who haven't taught online before, and I'll use my institution as an example, some of us had to volunteer to help others who haven't taught online before, right? So that's the way to train people who haven't taught online before. And as universities in Africa, we have to begin to think about also having departments dedicated to online teaching, training people for online teaching. Now, this COVID has brought us things that we haven't thought about before that we begin to think. And most universities in the UK or the US have online departments that help people to transition or move from class-based to online. And I think we have African Real Estate Society has people who are based in other developing or developed countries, which we can also bring our expertise to help those universities in Africa to learn how to teach online. And I'm sure most of us will be willing to volunteer that online training if we have the opportunity to do it, okay? So those are things that as instructors and professors, we have to begin to think about as ways to help people to be able to deliver content online.
Right. So I think Ken has given Sam a job to do there. Yeah, but you know, let me just actually, and that's where we're coming to actually, because Ken, you introduced you know, something very critical, you know, here, you know, specifically, you're saying that there needs to be more, not more needs to be done by specifically even African academics, right? The opportunity is there, and why are we not taking advantage of it? For me, to be honest, there's nothing stopping us, you know. It's there, the opportunity is there. Are we making use of it? And so it then brings me to, and then I'll bring Sam into the conversation here. When I was doing, you know, trying to learn more about online education on the continent, I spoke to some of my colleagues in Nigeria. Some of them are here on the forum. And I asked that during this process of this COVID-19 and the crisis, what's happening in your university? You know, are you guys now moving to online as we are in South Africa? And most of them just said, no, they don't have any sort of online platforms, or they haven't prepared for it at all. And so that's why I want to introduce Sam into this conversation. And Daniel Dabara, he says that in developing economies like Nigeria, where we have great challenges in terms of infrastructure relevant for online lecture delivery, example is electricity, access to reliable internet. What can we do to key into this novel way of teaching and learning? So I would like Sam to respond, then I would like Gavin to respond, and then Francois to respond on this.
So, thank you for that question. You see, before all this even broke out, we had a problem. Universities in Europe and North America started emphasizing teacher training. For the last 20 years, universities in Europe, North America, South America, and Asia created teacher training centers to train the teachers because they understood it's one thing to have a PhD in an area, it's another thing to know the best ways of teaching it. The second reason why they did that was that they wanted to address this problem of graduate unemployment. That already created a gap between universities in the North and universities in the South. COVID-19 has just introduced an extra layer of complication to that pre-existing problem. So if you ask me, what we really need to know, what we really need to do is to now emphasize teacher training. Real estate education must have equal importance, sitting alongside all the other sub-disciplines. You all know that in the last several years when we go for conferences, real estate education was like the ancillary topic. So in my view, the starting point in addressing the problem is training our teachers how to teach. Online teaching is just a subset of that because it's about knowing how to teach employable, how to produce employable graduates. Graduateness, as Francois referred to it in the beginning, that is a key obligation because those of us on the continent have not cracked that code as yet. Many of our graduates are still unemployable, and the primary reason was because we have not emphasized teaching skills. We have left it that if somebody has a doctoral degree, he automatically knows how to teach. And we knew all along that our graduates are never employable, but we never lifted a finger to deal with the problem. So COVID-19 has just added an extra layer of complication to that lingering problem. So the starting point, if you ask me, is we need to now begin to learn how to teach. And in very practical terms, we need to learn how to write learning objectives. We need to probe alternative ways of delivering material. We need to probe into the role of assessment very quickly. Because if you don't know these already, I can give you any tools that are available and you won't be able to use it. So the real problem is people not knowing how to teach, because technology at the end of the day is just a tool. So if you don't have pedagogical mastery, as far as the subject matter is concerned, the tool doesn't do much. In fact, the tool might actually get in the way. So I would say that for AfRES, the strategic opportunity is that when the dust settles, we need to assume a responsibility for training our academics. In January, before I came back, we took a tour of northern Spain, going to some universities that were already number 3 on the European teaching rankings, spending about 4 days discussing engineering pedagogy. And I sat at the back of the room thinking to myself, these people are already number 3 on the European teaching rankings behind Oxford and Cambridge. Look at how receptive they are to trying to understand how to take their teaching to the next level. Now, on the continent, we haven't even started our discussions yet. So I would say this. The first thing we need to do is to learn how to teach just the basics. Then we can learn how to take advantage of technology to advance the pedagogies in the various subjects that we teach.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Sam. I think that you have raised quite significant, and you've touched on as I can call it, back to basics, really. And we haven't even spoken about the curriculum as well, because teaching is one aspect, but what is the curriculum actually about? Because I suppose that's what the teacher would teach, right? It's a curriculum, right? So I think that's another conversation for another day. And so let me bring Gavin in, and then I'll bring Francois to discussion.
Sure. After Sam, I'm not sure. I think he's hit the nail spot on the head there. That the technology is but an enabler, and no matter what you're using, if you don't know how to use it, it doesn't matter what content you've got. It doesn't matter, again, with respect to what's in your curriculum. if you don't know how to deliver it effectively across any technology, or for that matter in the classroom, you're not going to be effective as a teacher and as an academic. So I think those are key critical skills that perhaps one needs to look at. I think going back to the question of the availability and the struggle that people have in terms of connectivity, of the base necessities of electricity and stuff, those are realities in many countries, and we know back home as the question that was asked with regards to in Nigeria. So we have our own struggles on that. Those things are realities, and I don't think it's necessarily our place to look for solutions to those. Those are limitations that are going to exist, and we've got to find ways to deliver content to people in the most effective way using available technologies. When the technology is simply not available, there's naught that we can do with it. Sure, there's ways that we can look, and if you look around, we can start sending USBs and the likes with content on it around the continent to get to people, but that becomes timely and costly, and those are things that can be done to work around the unavailability of technology. But if there's no electricity, well, the chances that there's going to be any online learning starts becoming a very distant reality.
And Gavin, I think I'll go to Francois. Just want to carry on the conversation with you, and I suppose that it then seems that when we are talking about online education in some parts of Africa, we're thinking about the elite, because in the elite of Africa, they don't need the power from the government, right? Because they have their own generating sets, and they don't even need water from the water corporation, because they have their own boreholes. So they have their own mini government literally happening. And what I do think is that an online education, for example, in the West, is open to everyone, and then online education in Africa is open to the elite? Because to me, that's what it looks like. And then I would like to then still carry on a conversation with you, Gavin. I want to introduce Patson made a comment, and I want to see if he can respond to it before I move to Francois. He says, are there offline remote teaching or learning platforms that can be used in real estate education, especially in the African context? So, for example, what you offer, if we're saying the problem is online accessibility and stuff, do we have offline sort of teaching platforms that you can recommend?
Yeah. So offline is a capability. I mean, Francois alluded to it earlier. Samuel spoke about it of rich, if you want, PDF versions of the content, which does then put an added burden on the teacher and the lecturer to convert his or her content into that format, because that can be delivered in bite-sized chunks, potentially to somebody's mobile phone, such that they're able to consume it. Because the term of democratizing education becomes a very real issue, because we can't have it that we're keeping education just for the elite or just for the upper echelons. We've got to take it to everybody who needs it and who deserves it. And so we need to be looking for innovative ways as institutions to break down those barriers to entry. The fundamentals, though, which is what I was saying, if there's zero of those, if there's zero electricity available in a territory, it's going to make any online learning very difficult, if not impossible. However, we've got to be thinking about ways of effectively and efficiently getting learning content to people, because people will find ways, and people are creative and innovative, and they'll find ways of collaborating to find solutions to learn in the end. And so if that means we've got to take our content, put it onto USB sticks and put them in the post and get them to people wherever they may be, then that's what we've got to do. Whilst there's a lack of governmental willingness and capability to deliver the basic necessities that we demand and need as a society. So, you know, it's all in the innovation, and that's up to us that we've got to look to become more innovative around that.
All right, excellent, Gavin. And I think I'll bring Francois into the conversation, but as I was listening to you, I started to think that we need to understand the environment that we're in, and it shouldn't then be just a copy and paste to say, okay, as Kenneth has said, that look, data is not an issue in the US, right? You know, so it could be connectivity issues here and there. So Kenneth has the liberty to then do video call, video stuff, Zoom and stuff. And I was just thinking to myself, there's a possibility that I know that some universities have radio stations, right? Isn't there the possibility where you have, you know, like you said, Gavin, online teaching has not just started. You said in the 1920s, there used to be some radio sort of stuff. So is there a possibility that we can use radio, you know, to give lectures? Why not? And also, I think I was listening to you specifically, Gavin, and what you said as well is, how can we sort of, in terms of online, create resources that use less data? So can we have, you know, maybe PDFs in terms of lecture notes that only has maybe 5 MB, you know, or 10 MB, which means the student can download 5 MB and they don't have to worry about data. So I think I hear you that there's loads of solutions around it, and we shouldn't think about what we cannot do, rather think about what we can do based on the resources that we have. So that's excellent. Thank you, Gavin. And Francois, can I bring you in?
Thank you, Kola. One of the questions you asked was, what did we do? And maybe let me just reflect for a moment as to what we've done, the issues that we faced, and maybe some of the solutions. So at the University of Cape Town, we decided to go completely online until pretty much, there's a chance that by October we move back to face-to-face, but pretty much online. The most important issue that that we've come across is, first, accessibility to laptops. Some students don't have a laptop. And if they have a laptop, some of them are fairly low specification laptops. So if you think you're going to run heavy stuff on it with big data, you're not going to do it on that. The second issue was around data. So what has happened is that our university has given every single student, like, please, I don't know if I got my numbers right, but I think it's about 9 gigs to start with. So every student received a certain bundle. What has also happened in South Africa, which is interesting, and this is where the cell phone companies need to come to the party. They have zero-rated students as long as they access the university platform. In our case, it's called the Vula platform. But the cell phone companies only came to the party in the evening. So they're not zero rating during the day, they're zero rating at night, completely on it. And that leads you to think, yes, I mean, when you run your courses and so forth. What we also did is a comprehensive survey of our students to understand who we would lose. And in short, the moment you start going with heavy clips, big data, you lose about 30% plus minus of your students. I've just got the numbers for my own course. We did it course by course. So we have a pretty good feel where that number lies. The tragedy sometimes of this is that the students you lose are the ones you need to look after the most. And that is what the problem is. Yes, the person with unlimited bundles sitting at home, that's one thing, but it's the students, the most vulnerable students. It's the ones that you really have face to face that you need, that we work hard with. There's a risk that you will lose those. So I think that's what we're going. I can tell you that if I were to say what proportion of discussion took most of our time or has taken, it's around the assessment. It's about assessments. Some students saying, I can't do this. I'm going on leave of absence. There is no way I'm going to be back next year. And so you've got to be able to handle that in a particular way. You also have to be very careful that the discussions that happen in chat rooms online are ethical, that students don't abuse each other. It doesn't sound, but suddenly you can have things being said online which are inappropriate, it's one thing saying it, going at something online. So you need to have protocols for communications which are very, very clear. And then, yes, I think that, Sam, you're right. This is about education. And we have to keep it that way. We have to keep it that it's the educator. And if we don't educate the academics, the training, whoever's involved, we run the risk that it's the tech that takes over. And I think that's what you want to avoid. So I believe there's much to be done, but I think we're going to find our own way. For example, Gavin and Sam, you're talking also both about, and Kenneth and Sean, about finding the in-between. I know that some of our departments have taken the view that they will be couriering, by courier, actual documents, actual reading documents. So now you end up with a balance of having received material, a certain amount of material that you can work with, that you can read, that you can, plus you almost supplement it then with the online experience, which then says if you can get onto the online, it's fine. If you can't. We've even taken a view that once we come back, that there may be specific lectures and tutors for those who have found it very, very difficult to deal with the environment. So yes, I take the view that I think possible solutions for this continent is to find a hybrid somewhere between full online, having still a lot of printed material which students get, and finding the balance that if you can't get to some of the online, there's enough in the printed material. And I like that concept that it's remote learning, and remote learning doesn't necessarily have to be a completely high-tech environment.
Oh, okay, excellent. Okay, just I think we have about 15 more minutes to go. Initially, our time was from 2 to 4, so we're doing very well with time. So we're almost wrapping up. What I want to do now is I've seen that there's been some questions coming through from the panelists. I'm sorry, from the participants, and so I'll just take I'll take some now. So there's one from John. John says that will online teaching affect the quality of education? I'm not sure if Sean, do you want to go? Will online teaching affect? Maybe I would like Sean and Ken to respond to that.
I think it's, as long as it's done correctly, you can maintain the quality. Obviously, I think it's different if you're talking about longer sort of degree courses, masters versus short courses. I guess there's different requirements involved. Although a lot of masters are done mostly remotely with some limited face-to-face lecture time. But from my experience, I think it is possible to maintain that quality. Again, it depends how online you want to go. So if you've sort of all the bells and whistles, then obviously there's a lot of functionality. You can have a lot of interaction involved in that. But I think it depends. It depends on your approach, and the development of courses is very important. The same with any curriculum development, but in terms of putting that content together and then thinking about how you're going to relay that to students via the platform, whether that's videos or interactive graphics, etc. So I think that development stage is very important, and think about who your audience is and what their capabilities are. And I think to touch on what's been said a few times, that's face-to-face engagements and learning in the classroom. There's a lot of value around that. in terms of even informal interactions, and that sort of benefits of having people in a room and sort of also, you know, sort of encouraging them to participate, etc. So online, it is possible to have that. So we have discussion forums where we really encourage interaction between students, and, you know, you try to facilitate as much as you can. That is one of the key areas, I think, of online. So you can have a sort of passive course where things run and people read and do online assignments. Obviously, that can be useful for some topics, but if you want to sort of cover quite a dynamic topic or a variety of areas, like with, I guess, a lot of property real estate courses, a lot of moving parts that come into things. I think that interaction is key in how you manage that. And it's like how Francois said as well, that can be quite difficult to manage as well. I mean, you've got to set clear times when people can interact, set clear rules, and sort of, you've also got to sort of keep your eye on those things. So because it's a live thing that's constantly going, things can, you know, easily get out of hand, I suppose. So it's an important part sort of to maintain that interaction. And there's also, you know, like this live video calls, etc., could be incorporated. But yeah, I think, you know, in short, you can maintain that quality. You just got to think very carefully about how you're putting it across, and then the capabilities and the skills and resources needed for your students.
All right, excellent. Okay, let me get Gavin in. Gavin, you have some comments on that? Do you think online education reduces the quality, Gavin?
No, I agree 100% with Sean. I think it's all in the how you do it. I want to pick up on something that he did say. No matter which online solution you're looking at, I think one of the critical things, and Francois spoke about it earlier, is know your audience. Know what their limitations are. Know what the level of accessibility is. How much bandwidth do they have? Do they have laptops? You know, what sort of things? And to the question and the comment that somebody made with regards to, you know, education happening in Kenya using radios, that's all good and well. Again, you know, to what extent what technology is available to your students, and which of that can you effectively and efficiently use? And I think that's gonna determine, one, the access point, and then two, the quality is how well prepared the lecturers are. Again, perhaps picking up with what Samuel said is, you know, are the educators sufficiently educated in how to teach? And that's maybe an opportunity that we need to explore in a little bit more detail.
Kenneth, we like to comment. Do you think that online learning or education sort of you know, does it reduce the quality of education, in your opinion?
Thank you, Kola, and thank you for the person who asked the question. I think it's very relevant. In my opinion, as others panelists have said, online education shouldn't, all things being equal, shouldn't compromise on the quality at all. And as Sean said, and most of the time, you have to set clear guidelines for the students, as well as you, the professor, have to have your own guidelines as to what you want to do and when you want to meet deadlines and all that. Now, some of you have already mentioned that teaching remotely or online, whatever you want to call it, can take various forms. It can be text-based. Now, it can also be audio enhanced, and it can be video enhanced. So the best approach is always to combine all those three areas, right? You don't stick to one to deliver your content. That way, it reaches a lot of audience and different diverse group of students, depending on what they are good at, whether they like text-based or they like audio or they like video, okay? That helps each student being able to learn. And so if you set guidelines and you are able to make sure that students actually do what they are supposed to do, break assessments into smaller pieces so that you know that the students are following the content, that should help in the quality of the content they are delivering, I think so. Again, I said, all else being equal, you shouldn't compromise on quality at all.
All right, excellent. Francois, I see that your hand is raised. I'll bring you in early. I'll bring you later. I'm not sure if Catherine wanted to speak on her comment. Catherine? Okay. All right, I think Catherine is... Hello, Catherine?
Yes, can you hear me?
Hi. Just to introduce Catherine, who Catherine is to the panelists and participants. So Catherine is the president. She's the president of the African Real Estate Society. And I saw, Catherine, that you made a comment about Kenya. I don't know if you wanted to share with us, you know, in terms of, you know, how you've dealt with this online thing. And then you also talked about radio as well, that radio is also used for primary school and high school. I don't know if you want to share with us, the panelists and the participants. Thank you, Catherine.
Okay, what I was saying about the radio in primary schools and high schools, that has been used, you know, for decades. But the main thing is you need to supervise, and you also need to, what they do with the radio is have a radio station cooperate with the Kenya Institute of Education so that they prepare the curriculum for a particular subject. So it goes beyond just the radio itself, but the school together with the curriculum developers. And then the need then for the teachers to follow up on their students, whether they actually understood what the lesson was about. On the university, for the last probably 3 or 4 weeks, we've been trained as lecturers for the online. But the main issue, like I've said in the comment, was the lack of bundles, which we are getting now these last 2 weeks. And then the need then for the, once you get the bundles, then are you sure the students also have the equipment, laptops and the telephones, that they're able to join a class. But we've run a few classes, and I can say the numbers of the students are very good. We're using Google Classroom, and I think that has been going on very well. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Catherine. I just wanted to, Catherine, before you leave, I just wanted to also find out, in terms of what is happening in the University of Nairobi, for example, how much bundle is given to each student, and also how does the university sort of cater for it with their budgeting? Maybe you can share with us.
I don't know how much bundle, because I got my bundles today, so I don't know exactly how much one is getting. But the university, I think, invited several telecom or service providers, and they chose, you know, going through the procurement system. Then they chose the one that should offer the less expensive, but also the one that had a wider coverage. That is telecom. But they're also saying where telecom is not available, then they'll go with the other alternative, which is Safaricom or Airtel, whichever server or provider is in a particular place. So that is how they're handling this. So we'll probably be seeing whether that will work in the next week or so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Catherine. And I think, and there we see that, you know, again, as we always say every time, that Africa is not a homogeneous environment. It's very heterogeneous, and different things are happening in different markets, in different countries. So what I was sharing, what was happening with my colleagues in Nigeria is not what is happening in Kenya, because again, we need to be careful, because University of Nairobi is not other universities in Kenya. So University of Nairobi is just one university within Kenya. So again, the question is it being rolled out throughout the whole country? That's another question. And so I think we're getting to the end of our of today's webinar on online or remote education. So what I would like to do before we finish is I would like each of our panelists just to give us a closing remark, 1 or 2 minutes closing remark. So we start from Kenneth. we start from Kenneth, then we move to Gavin, then Sam, then Francois, and then we finish with Sean. I think it's just more of a closing remark to, in terms of what the tips, or what do you think your general comments are in regards to remote or online education? Is it here to stay? How can we African academics, how can we adapt to this change? I think that is what our participants want to take away. So Kenneth, I'll start with you. Yeah, Kenneth, you're on.
Okay. Thank you, Kola, and I want to thank the African Real Estate Society for the opportunity to be on this panel, and I'm very grateful. Now, in terms of whether online teaching is going to stay or not, and what we can do to kind of be in that arena, I would say that going forward, it's important that we develop hybrid approach. If things didn't get back to normal and we are teaching face-to-face, we also have to be thinking about the possibility that maybe other students are able to learn better on an online setting. So we can always blend the two approaches, right? And in terms of how we get it to our students, obviously the universities will do their part, but I think governments, including local governments, will also have to play a role in there, in terms of providing infrastructure for students to be able to access some of these things. And I'm already proud about what is happening in Kenya. I think some governments can take up that example, trying to help people. Even in the US, governments do help. I remember in my state, they give computers to students in the lower level to learn, right? Because not everyone has a computer. So governments can begin to also take up that role. And as instructors, we too have to continuously learn the process. Things change all the time, technology change. And so we have to be willing to adapt to that change and to go with that. Now, in terms of the platform that we can use to deliver our materials, we don't have to stick to one platform. We can use whatever ways we can do to reach to so many audiences, whether we want to use text-based, audio enhanced or video enhanced. We have to be able to combine those approaches to reach to so many students as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. Thank you. And now we'll move to Gavin. Your closing remarks, Gavin.
Thanks, Kola, and echo what Kenneth had to say. Thanks to the Society for the invitation and the platform to address you. I think there's a saying that goes something along the line of, don't waste a good crisis. And as painful as what it is to be in quarantine and lockdown at the moment, and faced with this crisis that we're all in, it's an opportunity that's presented to us, and we have a tremendous opportunity to rise up to that, and not to get left behind. I think if we do it well and we prepared and we deliver excellent learning in the blend that Kenneth alluded to, we'll prepare the students for what will come when we return, whether it's in October, as Francois alluded to, or earlier, when we return to something resembling normality or new normal. The students will be far more inclined to go along with us. And so I go back to the point that I made earlier of, let's not mess it up. We've got this opportunity, and let's grab it with both hands and take advantage of it. So thanks again, and let's not get left behind.
Thank you so much, Gavin, for your insights. So I'll move on to Sam. Azasu.
So one issue we haven't touched on is the characteristics of online learners. A lot of the research before this lockdown has shown online education requires students to be highly motivated and very disciplined. As a result, online education has very high dropout rates. That is the risk we face. with this movement to remote teaching and learning. As of this morning, we had one student who mailed in and said he wanted to drop out because he didn't think he could cope. Those are the risks we face. So the question is, how do we cope? As a matter of urgency, we need to really grapple with the question of teacher training. We need to learn how to teach so that we can keep the learning experience as interesting in the online environment as it would have been if we were teaching face-to-face. Because if we do not find ways to keep the students engaged, we do face a risk of dropouts. We do face an oncoming risk of low enrollment because of our inability to adapt to sustain the quality of the learning experience. And for AfRES, now we need to put real estate education on the agenda. That as soon as we can, maybe using the webinars, we need to probably find a way to begin to do a crash course in curriculum design and teaching for our membership during the lockdown and past the lockdown, because now we need to know how to do this stuff in order to take advantage of the technologies that are available to us.
Thank you, Sam. Excellent. Francois?
Let me make a few points. First of all, I think many of us across the continent, the educators, are being forced into some form of online delivery. I have made it very clear to my students that things will go wrong, that they shouldn't expect an online delivery here, but that if we work together, we can get there. And I think that one really has to, and I take Gavin's point as well, that you got to be very careful that if we offer something that we can't deliver on, that the students will come back saying, no, thank you in future. So I think it's very important that as we go through this, one has to remember there are universities across the world that have spent millions of US dollars to get platforms going, and we are going in this at the moment because we have to. And I can assure you that I've had colleagues, but not necessarily in my department, who have said, we should actually shut the university down. We should actually not be playing this game. But of course, that's unrealistic because, I mean, what would you do next year? And more students coming in. So I think let's be very careful about that. The other issue is we've got to see this a bit also as an opportunity. And I think the point has been made in the panel. First, I think it's an opportunity to see when we get back to normal, what have we learned? The material we have created, it's not lost. It'll never be lost. But let's see how we integrate it into what comes up next. I'm also of the view that if we get this right, there is, and I take the point that online you can lose students. And by the way, Sean, I mean, with what Sean is involved with, there are people who are in contact with the students continuously saying, why haven't you sent in the assignment? What is happening? To avoid students being lost on the way. But I think the positive issue is that if we can get this right, we can bring a lot of excellent education to a lot of people across the continent. People who at the moment who can't afford to come to our big cities, where res is expensive, accommodation, what students spend on those sort of things. If they can spend that on a laptop or a good laptop, okay, assuming that they have everything else. I'm not saying it's the answer, but I think it is, online education is a way to actually bring education across the continent. And I take the point, the public sector has to come to that. For example, in Cape Town, all the libraries now have our EduRoam. You know, many academics will know what EduRoam is. It's, you know, a system that allows us to move from one internet service. Provide that in the library. Turn your libraries into study centers with excellent internet connections where students can go and spend their time working. So I think if everyone becomes creative, I think that and we do this right, we have opportunities. Yes, we're going to adapt. I don't think that any educator needs to be threatened by any of this. I think that educators will remain central to this. I just cannot believe that any quality education will be delivered without the educator in the center of it. It's a bit like a newspaper where people say, we need journalists. Instead of the paper version, we're now on online media. You still need the good journalist. It's the form that has changed. And so, yes, we are maybe being pushed a bit into this, but I think the whole world is being pushed into technologies at the moment. And I think that if there's one thing as tragic as COVID-19 is for many of us, for communities, hopefully something good will come out of this. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Francois, for your insights. We'll now bring in Sean. Sean?
Thanks, Kola. Yes, thanks to Kola and everyone involved. I'm also involved in SAfRES, so just thanks to the panelists for great discussion. I think a lot of great points have been raised. Just before I give my brief comments, just to pick up on a few things the panelists just said in their comments. Kenneth mentioned the blended model. I think this is something that will become even more popular, especially with the lessons learned in the current sort of with the current crisis, in terms of finding a way to put the best of both worlds in, and you can also expand your reach in that. And then just he also touched on multiple platforms. I think we need to be open to what's out there, and a lot of institutions will have to think about using something that's already set up, and perhaps developing their own platform. But got to just think about the risks involved. Like Francois said, there are times where these things are built and they don't quite work in practice. So perhaps a phased approach is best. Gavin, just further on that, Francois also touched on this opportunity in a crisis. So I think there'll be a lot of lessons to be learned, as has been said. And there'll be positives and negatives, obviously, and it'll highlight a lot of issues specifically in our continents, a lot of them which we've spoken about now. So we'll be able to find practical solutions that can actually reach the people that need the education, or maybe develop also. A lot of these platforms are actually from outside the continent. Obviously, some countries are more advanced, some institutions. So I think it's an opportunity for universities, other institutions, entrepreneurs, etc., to look at this. There are some good cases, obviously, on the continent, but I think there could be some more innovation in this field. Sam, that was a very good point. I think students need to be disciplined and motivated. I think that's key. Sorry, Kola, I just realized I might be taking your job here. But yeah, these are just some key points that came out to me. But that's a very big thing, the dropout rates, in terms of like a student sitting at home on their laptop, in terms of staying motivated, staying engaged. As Francois said, with the courses I'm involved in, there's actually a support team. There's 24-hour technical support. There's a success manager that's keeping tabs on students. So you've got to be aware of the resource involved that to make things successful. And Francois said educators are key. I don't think that's ever going to change. Technology is not going to make that disappear. And there are opportunities going forward. So just on my side, I think, I'm not a sort of full academic, obviously. I'm coming from training, sort of short courses and workshops, etc., and obviously being students in my past life. But I think there'll be value for face-to-face. That's not going to disappear. I think blended is very, very exciting. And it's been proven that online is a viable source as well. But I think it'll be a varied approach is important. And sometimes, especially say in the given situation with the crisis and the sort of the limited timelines institutions have to go online, sometimes it's not, you shouldn't get caught up in the tech, I suppose, and all the shiny, exciting things out there. It needs to be fit for purpose. So more is not always better, I think, when you're thinking of these platforms. So it really is, what do people have available to them, and how could this work in our communities and also remote communities? Because if we can get that to work, I think it could really, like Francois said, reach a new audience in terms of taking education across the continent. So I think there's a real opportunity there, and I think it'll be exciting. I think to see what comes out of emerging markets in this area. So yes, but thanks again. Yeah, it's a great discussion.
All right, excellent. Thank you, guys. Just to do a summary of what I think I was hearing from you, the panelists, and I think Kenneth has touched on that instructors need to be dynamic, and I think what we're going to see going forward, it would be if we had a vacancy for a professor right now in a year or 2 years from now, would be, can you teach online? And I think that would be an experience, and that would, universities will start filtering away some candidates that do not have online experience. I think that's just our reality, and that we need to face it. I hear Gavin as well. He's kept on saying that there is opportunity in this crisis, and that we shouldn't blow it. I think that is quite something that we need to take along with us. Also, I think Francois as well and Sam have reiterated the same thing. I think Sam has also spoken more about the curriculum, spoken about the educators themselves as well. We need to think about the educators as well. Are they able to deliver on an online platform? I think that's very essential. And I think from African Real Estate Society as well, we had done 2 webinars. This is the second webinar. We've done the first webinar on the effect of COVID-19 on the Southern African real estate markets. And what I picked up as well is that real estate education is far behind, even in terms of participation. Just to share numbers with you, for the program that we had about 2 weeks ago on the industry, but over 250 participants. That was how oversubscribed it was. And currently, when we talk about real estate education, we have about 30 participants. So again, what is the message being passed? It's that education is not at the forefront in Africa, and it's something that we need to discuss. As from an AfRES point of view as well, Francois, myself, Sam, Sean, the president is here, President Catherine as well is here. It's something that the agenda that we need to push forward, because we're seeing that our colleagues are not, there's now an online divide, right? Because the industry can participate online. Academia is not participating online. So it's something that we need to think about going forward. And on behalf of the African Real Estate Society, I would like to thank our corporate sponsors, Gyro. I would like to thank Kenneth. Thank you for joining us from the United States. Gavin, thank you for joining us, Wits University. Sam, Francois, Sean, you're all part of the team. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the president as well for making a cameo appearance. And there are some people that have put this behind the scenes, have put this together. Sean has helped to put it on, helped assist to put this together. Sean as well, Sean Ajayi, who is at the background as well. So we're very thankful to them. Thank you to our audience. Familiar faces. Ali is on here. John is on here. So those are very familiar faces. Thank you for staying till the end. And this is the end of our webinar series. We need to think about if we're going to, bring more. We'll think about that. But currently, this is the end of our webinar series. We don't know when the lockdown is going to end. So to everyone, stay safe, stay sane, and again, yes, I would like to thank all the panelists. You've done a very great job, and I know that the audience have learned a lot of things from online education. So we really appreciate all of you. So all the best, guys. And thank you. Cheers. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Bye.